Who wouldn't want to own a Patek Philippe Nautilus, an AP Royal Oak, or Rolex diver? They're great watches, but for most people, they're just too expensive. But what if I told you that you can get watches that give a similar experience for a fraction of the price? And I'm not talking about homages, replicas, or fakes. Well, you can. These are some excellent affordable watches that compete with ultra high-end offerings from Chopard, Jaeger, le-coultre, and Rolex. Let's dive in. Raymond Weill Meal Seam versus the LUC 1860 or the XPS Green. The Chopard LUC XPS Prussian Blue. It's a $12,000 stunner of a dress watch. 40mm, sector style dial with sub-second sunray Prussian blue dial color and a light brown leather strap. Chopard are one of the Swiss manufacturers that do the most themselves in terms of in-houseness. They have retained a lot of the capability to do things themselves. It's not important in the sense of who made it, but it is important because you won't find their movements in other brands. What is Chopard is in large part Chopard's own. The watch itself is an absolute stunner, and the key selling points are the dial and the movement. It's not Chopard's highest end movement, but it is a thin micro-rotor design which is both technically accomplished and aesthetically pleasing. At just under $2,500, the biggest compromise on the Raymond Weill Meal Seam is the movement. This isn't an ultra-slim micro-rotor movement with all the higher-end bells and whistles, but it's cheaper, it's still reasonably thin. The watch itself comes in at around 10.5mm in thickness, which is great for a dress-style watch, and it's cased in a 39mm case. Honestly, I prefer the dial. Not that it's going to stand up to the same degree of pixel peeping perfection that Chopard will in terms of sharpness of plots, but because it isn't quite as flashy. The dial doesn't have that sunburst effect, and it just isn't as reflective in real life, but it makes for a watch that's a little bit more restrained. It gives the watch more versatility, and the addition of a steel bracelet is a big plus in most people's eyes. You can always throw on a good leather strap for a couple of $100 extra. Hamilton Murph instead of a 5226 from Patek. In the, let's call it, starter Patek range of watches, there's only one watch I keep coming back to, and it's the Patek 5226. It's almost a $50,000-ish white gold three-hander with a date window. Its claim to fame compared to other color drivers is a textured, almost gravel-style dial with a faint gradation effect, syringe hands, and a clear, legible set of numerals on the dial. It's also got a minute track on the outer edge of the dial. The watch has a case flank adorned with a Clou de Paris motif, which gives the watch even more character without going overboard. It's a detail that's there when you look for it, but it isn't screaming in your face to be looked at constantly. The movement is the 26-330, where the 330 indicates the thickness of the movement, 3.3mm, which is pretty impressive for a watch with a full-size rotor. The alternative here is the Hamilton Murph, a watch that doesn't cost $50,000, but only a little bit over $1,000. Side by side, it's apparent that they share a lot of the same design ideas. The hands are not syringe, but cathedral. The font is different, but it's still highly legible. It's still this black and Fautina brown colorway. It's basically a dressy field watch, and ever since it made its debut in the movie Interstellar, it's been a crowd pleaser for Hamilton. I'm partial to the 42mm version for a teeny tiny reason. Where the 5226 has the Clou de Paris case flank, the 42mm Murph has the word Eureka written in Morse code on the seconds hand. The 38mm doesn't have that detail. Just like the Patek, it's a detail that's there if you care to look, but it's not shouting in your face. The two watches, although they have striking aesthetic overlaps, are different in meaningful ways. Very few, if any, people are going to pull off the Patek as a rugged or laid-back watch. There's always an air of refinement that comes from the very fact that you know you're wearing a Patek, but also because everything is shiny and clean and polished. Hamilton go for a less dainty case shape and more satination, which makes for a more salt-of-the-earth appeal that the Patek just doesn't have. IWC have one of the best sports watches under $10,000 in my opinion. It's the IWC Pilot Mark 20. Many of you know that I own it. At 40mm with 120 hours of power reserve, in my case, a sunray blue dial, it does everything you want from a so-called go anywhere, do anything kind of watch. You can dress it up, you can dress it down, it's got an easy exchange bracelet, it's got quick adjust, and at $6,100, it's a price that has remained constant for several years, by the way, and is actually, pretty damn decent. At Watches and Wonders in 2026, I was presented with the new Alpina Star Timer Pilot's watch. It's priced at around $1,300, give or take a tariff or two, and you get a pilot's watch with all the pilot's watch DNA you want. It's not as go anywhere and do anything as the IWC. The IWC does a far better job of looking like a luxury pilot's watch because of the bracelet and especially with the Sunray Blue version. But compare the IWC Pilot 20 with the black dial and the Alpina models, then they are much more comparable. And as tool-forward pilot's watches, The Alpina is more compelling. It's down to a couple of elements. The numerals and markers on the Alpina dial are not just painted lume. They are blocks of lume cut and placed on the dial. This adds depth to the dial, it increases legibility, and it turns up the functional aesthetic of the dial. Not to 11, because the amp doesn't go that far, but pretty far. The crown is also a little bit bigger proportionally to the case and a little bit more roughly knurled. The lines of the case are more aggressive. They're actually more similar to the Zenith Pilot. The Alpina is just a little bit chunkier in look without actually being meaningfully bigger in objective dimensions. The different choices of straps also beef up the watch. In the Star Timer Pilot from Alpina, I think they have a winner. It might not succeed in competing with high-end sports watches, but for that tool Pilot look, you can hardly go wrong. And although I like my Locos and Storvas, the Alpina is a little bit more modern and not quite as 1943 leaning. I like to keep my YouTube channel down to earth and BS free. But I am ambitious. I would like more subscribers, and half of you I know are watching this video and are repeat viewers, but you've not subscribed yet. So click the button, subscribe. Thanks a ton. Furlan Marri Mecha Quartz instead of an Angelus monopusher. So far, I've succeeded in taking a high-end premium-looking watch and finding a lower-end, more tool-forward version of that watch. So you might assume that finding a premium-looking watch isn't possible, but that would be wrong. I give you the Angelus monopusher and the Furlan Marri Mecha Quartz. It isn't even fully mechanical. It's a mecha quartz, which means you have a quartz-based movement that powers a mechanical chronograph on top. But Furlan Marri are exceptionally good at making these kind of classic haute horology-looking timepieces. The Disco Volante, the Comte de Vache, and the mecha quartzes all punch way above their price point in terms of premium look and feel. They don't default to satination, they don't stick to flat dials. What they do is they lean heavily into strong classic design cues like the ones you'll find on Lange datagraphs, high-end Pateks, and the Angelus monopusher. The mecha quartz has that classic chronograph look to it with that internal speed timer scale. Minutes and seconds tracks, dual subdials, and Roman numerals that work. The model that comes closest to the Angelus is the gold-plated version, but my personal favorite is the black-dialed single subdial Nero Sabia. Both come in at around $800 US. Nomos Orion or a JLC Master Control Ultra Thin. Dress watches are a funny proposition because at their core, they are, by design, ultra-restrained. Paying for a high-end dress watch can to some people feel pointless because in all honesty, there's rarely anything particularly interesting going on the dial. The movements can be all sorts of special, but white dials, stick indices, and pointer hands are hard to really make exciting. It's like if you've been starving and somebody throws you a cracker. You're going to be like, that's no saltine, that's a Ritz cracker. But then after a while, you're like, it's just a cracker. But dress watches are about attention to detail, and at just over $10,000, JLC make one of the best ones out there in the JLC Master Ultra Thin 39mm watch. It's under 8mm in thickness, it's got a silver dial with ultra thin applied markers and an ultra thin sword hands. It has polish here and there to emphasize the premium nature, but with thin lugs and a slim case profile, there's not a lot of shine to kill the fundamental simplicity and restraint of the watch. Now, you could go down to Daniel Wellington and buy a plain dialed watch from them, but the fact is, more than almost any other type of watch, the dress watch looks really, really cheap, really quickly. You'd think it would be hard, but cheap dress watches very easily look cheap. Bad finishing, wrong proportions, dial whites that look like recycled A4 paper, and cases that look like they were made out of bottle caps. But not the Nomos Orion. Especially, but not only, the Orion Weiss in 33mm. Years back, there used to be a fully Weiss, which means white in German, version with a sub-seconds dial in 35mm, but sadly, I don't think it's there anymore. The Neomatic Doré in 36mm will do in a pinch, but I personally prefer the pure Weiss. This watch is about $3,500–4,000, so it's not as big a saving as a Murph versus a 5226, but you do get a true white dial and not toilet paper white. You get crisp, sharp, and clean hands and markers. You get perfect proportions, and you get a slim fit. I mean, what's not to like? There's literally no reason to go further up in price. Every time I suggest an alternative to Rolex, there's bound to be a small group of people that cannot help themselves and write, there's no alternative. If you can't afford a Rolex, everything else is just cope. And obviously, I think that's nonsense. For some people, it's about price. For others, the Rolex version just isn't the nicest option. There can be so many reasons why people don't want one. So what's the alternative to a Rolex Explorer? The Tudor Ranger. But of course, the Rolex is 36 or 40mm, the Ranger is 36 or 39. The Rolex is available in black only with a gloss dial and glossy markers. The Tudor has two dial options. Both are more matted, they're painted, lumed, and old Tina faux numerals. The bracelets might as well be the same. 3-link, satinated, excellent clasp. So here's how I would rank the Ranger and the Explorer. I would rank first the classic original or an old school 36mm Rolex Explorer first. Second, I would rank the Ranger. Third, the modern Explorers. The reason? Ruggedness and adherence to its original purpose. The modern Explorer is, to me sometimes, an Oyster Perpetual with numerals on the dial. It's a sports watch. The others are tour watches. Laurent Ferrier Sport, a watch that starts around $30,000 and just goes up from there. The Sport Traveler is something like $70,000. Laurent Ferrier are one of those if you know kind of brands that get serious street cred. It's a brand founded by a former Patek Philippe creative director, and their watches are aesthetic and technical marvels. Cases, dials, movements are phenomenal, and it's fast becoming an FP Jean kind of hype brand. There's no way you're getting anything comparable in a more affordable package. The amount of horology that goes into a Laurent Ferrier is simply astounding. But you can get a little bit of the look in a Brew. It's mainly down to the case head shape. Pretty much everything else is different. It's got a 3-link bracelet versus a single link. It's got a classic dial versus Art Deco pop dials. It's got restraint versus pop. But the Brew models still have something inherently cool about them. And there just aren't that many watches with this type of case. You're getting a much more hipster kind of watch, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Fiers Brunswick versus Panerai Radiomir. This is mainly comparing to the Douai, to be fair, but also 1 or 2 Radiomirs. Why the Douai? Because Fiers make the Brunswick, which forgoes satinated cases, thick rubber or canvas straps, and matte sandwich dials for polished cases, gloss leather, or steel bracelets and dials with classic dress watch vibes. Salmon dials, sector-style dials, gloss mother-of-pearl dials. Panerai are usually about more rugged designs, but the Douai is Panerai's attempt to convince people that a Panerai can be restrained and slightly formal. There are also Radiomirs in 40mm here and there, like the Quaranta, with smoky green dials and gold hands and mark. But at over $6,000 for a Panerai and less than $3,000 for a Fiers, the choice really isn't that hard. Fiers quality, in my experience, is of a really high standard. Le Juperet movements are solid with good power reserve at just under 50 hours and decent accuracy. Panerai don't splurge on movement finishing on their entry models, so the difference isn't as big as the price tag might indicate. Last up, IWC Ingenieur Perpetual Calendar for a smidge over $40,000. The Ingenieur is a Gerald Genta design, and that's something that means that some people want it just because of that. IWC also makes some really solid perpetual calendars. They do sometimes get a little bit thick, but perpetual calendars are an IWC and Kurt Klaus thing. Frederique Constant have been pushing hard on offering value, and especially value in complications for a long time. That's reflected in the High Life Perpetual Calendar, which costs around $13,000. On the technical side of things, most experts will likely agree that the IWC is the better movement, but you wouldn't know it looking through the display caseback. Both have a skeletonized rotor, both have different detailings like Geneva striping and perlage. The IWC is more intricate and detailed in its architecture, but I've never claimed you're getting the same at a lower price. You almost always have to compromise somewhat when it comes to movements. Dial side though, the Constant is a good looking one, and I'd be happy to own one. Overall, it's less iconic and it's more muted in its design language, and I actually think that will appeal to some people. The design is more restrained. It doesn't shout Gerald Genta or any other designer for that matter, and it makes for something that isn't as much a flashy piece of statement watch. It's a good looking, refined watch. It's also a lot like the new JLC, which I had hands on briefly at Watches and Wonders 2026. Probably should have compared those two. We'll wait until I actually get the JLC in for review. Oh well. Anyway, Frederique Constant for the win. There are, in theory, good reasons to spend absurd amounts of money on high-end watches, but you don't have to. There are good watches out there and watches that give you 80-90% of what you're dreaming of for a fraction of the price. So do you have any pairings of high-end versus affordable? Share your suggestions in the comments. Like, subscribe. Cheers.